Build your kingdom here, let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand, heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire, win this nation back, and change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here, we pray. Come set your rule and reign in our hearts again. Increase in us, we pray. Unveil why we're made. Come set our hearts ablaze with hope, like wildfire in our very souls. Holy Spirit, come invade us now. We are your church. We need your power. Yes, we do. In us. We seek your kingdom first. We hunger and we thirst. We refuse to waste our lives for your joy and pride. To see the captive hearts released, hurt the sick, the poor at peace. We lay down our lives for heaven's cause. We are your church. We pray revive. Will you stand with me? Build your kingdom here. And build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here, we pray. Unleash your kingdom's power, reaching the near and far. No force of hell can stop your beauty changing hearts. You made us for much more than this. Awake the kingdom, sing in us. Fill us with the strength and love of Christ. We are your church. Yes, we are. We are the hope. You believe that? On earth. Let me hear you sing. Build your kingdom. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here, we pray. You can have a seat. Change the atmosphere, we pray. Hopefully that's your prayer this morning. Mark comes to bring some announcements.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome on Kojiko and Skype. Announcements. Deeper courses follow the gathering today. These courses help us make and become better disciples of Christ. Perplexed is in the boardroom, and Disciple Shift is in the fireside room. If you have registered, please pick up your lunch and proceed to your course. Childcare is provided. The Christmas chorale practices tonight between 5 and 6 p.m. here in the sanctuary. Baptism classes are beginning. If you ever thought that this could be the next step for you, please see Merv today. Christmas banquet tickets are on sale in the foyer today. Our banquet is Saturday, December 1st. There are a limited number of seats, and they are $5 each. All proceeds from tickets and the silent auction will be going towards me, going to our 2019 short-term missions trip to Bolivia. And don't forget to fill a shoebox for those in Burlington who are in need this cold winter season. Instructions are in the foyer. I have some stories to share. They say that hump day, Wednesday, is the hardest day to get through during the work week. Having Halloween fall on a Wednesday is truly the work of the devil. School is supposed to be nut-free, and my week was filled with kids running around the class, the gym, throwing candy wrappers everywhere. It was nuts. Halloween has changed a lot since I was a kid. I actually never went trick-or-treating. Everyone was wearing costumes that were ghouls or witches, and I think during the 80s there was this big movement against that stuff, and so my parents were like, we won't celebrate evil, but you can have the candy, so here. And they just gave me the box of candy, and I was like, wow, that teaches me by not working I get the reward, so I was all for that. It's changed a lot now. Now it's a lot more like cosplay. People kind of just celebrate dressing up. People wear Marvel heroes or Star Wars costumes. My first year of teaching, I didn't know what to do. I just showed up and didn't wear anything. But then I quickly learned that it's okay if you're the only person that's dressed up or wearing something weird. I learned that what costume you pick can define you, can turn you into a legend as a teacher. So I brought a picture. I was the paper bag princess. I got a lot of kids laughing at that. Actually, one kid walked in the door. She's always early, hangs up her bag, looks, and was like, whoa. She was so startled that I was sitting in the classroom. She saw the wig and had no idea who I was. But I am really thankful that Remembrance Day has not changed a lot since I was a kid. There's been some changes, like giving the younger students poppy stickers so they don't lose their poppy because it falls off like mine this morning. We still all gather in the gym to experience the cost of peace. We still quote Flanders Field. We hang wreaths of poppies and listen to different stories of people's experiences. We no longer have access to the veterans that fought in World War I, but students get to see a veteran that has fought in a different war or has served their country, and they come and share their story. On my mom's side, my grandfather fought in the war, and I have a picture of that. He signed up when he was 18. People say I'm the spitting image of him, all 130 pounds. We even share the same lack of ability to distinguish colors. My gramp tried to enlist as soon as he was of age, 18, in 1941, but due to his color blindness, he was ineligible to serve in the Navy, the Air Force, or the infantry. And people often hear that, and they're like, what? You can't serve? It's like, well, if you're squinting at a bush and aren't sure if that's a stick or a rifle sticking out of it, it's not going to end well. So Army camouflage fools people that can see colors regularly. So if you get them mixed up, that's tough. But I often reflect and think perhaps that color blindness was a massive blessing that my family received. My grandpa was put onto the medical team because he couldn't serve in those other areas. And his job was driving the trucks to pick up the wounded soldiers and to carry them to hospitals. He was never put on a front line where the most danger was, and he served 2 years after he was married. And so he was able to come back and then have children. So it's kind of funny to think about it that way. I never got to hear about my grandfather talk about war at all. Not once. Never dropped one comment ever. Which for me bothered me because I'd ask him because I loved history and I actually went to school for history. But if my grandpa was driving me somewhere and there was a bang, he would, with reflexes, duck right down under the windshield. Those were some of the only signs that I can remember as a kid of the type of sacrifice that my grandfather made. And growing up and learning about things like PTSD, I started realizing that many of his reflexes, if you shut the microwave door too hard, why he would duck every single time. My grandpa found a way to serve where he was needed and made sacrifices to help bring peace. And I'm forever grateful that my family was blessed and that I was able to grow up knowing my grandpa.
And so we remember. And we're mindful that a war still wages on. A war that we have been invited into, namely a kingdom, God's kingdom, kingdom that never will fall. And so we are called to something bigger than ourselves, into something that is eternal. And so this morning, as we sing, as we listen, as we participate through stories, may we know that we are part of a kingdom, the kingdom of God. Let's sing this song called Crown Him with Many Crowns. The Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns all give life, you are love, bring light to the dark. Yes, you do. You give hope, restore the heart. Sing with me. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. Pour out our praise. It's your breath stories, any stories of God's faithfulness or a story you're remembering this morning?
So good morning, my fellow neighborhood missionaries. Is this mic on? Okay, you can hear me? I thought maybe you're dead, I didn't know. So one of my stories that my dad shared with me about his war experience, one of my favorites, I think. Well, actually, all the stories were kind of interesting. He was telling me about a time when they were at sea. He was in the Navy, and there was a fellow on the ship, a great big guy, and he was just losing it. Like he was just panicking, and it was a situation that called for level heads. It was as far as I understand it was at night, and there was a threat of enemy, and everybody was supposed to be quiet, and this guy couldn't keep it together, and he was losing it, and other guys had gone up and slapped him and tried to get his attention. No one could get this guy to calm down, so they said to my dad, "You got to help us." He says, "Okay." And my dad, he's like short like me, tough but short. So he goes up to this guy, and he looks at him, and he calls him by name, and then he swore at him. And the guy stopped. He goes, "Dennis, you never swear." And it calmed him right down. And I love that. I love that story, and I think part of it is because the character of my dad's life was so different that when he acted like the world, it was a shocking thing. I love that about my dad. We're on week 5 of a series where we're looking at the Gospel of Mark, and each week we're looking at one chapter, and so week 5, you guessed it, chapter 5. And if you want to open your Bibles, if you brought them, or you can find one of the chairs in front of you, you can follow along if you like. And if you've been listening to the news this week, you've probably heard all kinds of disturbing stories like I have. 13 people gunned down in California in a bar by a lone gunman who just starts shooting people. Government officials stepping down because of sexual indiscretions and ongoing infidelity and addictions treatment needed. A home blown up because a man was using the house to produce an illegal substance. Random shootings in Toronto, taking more lives. Just in this week. Just another week. And don't you find that after a while, it's easy to become hardened by it all, cynical? Don't you find that you want to simply just kind of shrug your shoulders and then isolate yourself in your own little corner, your own home, your own little bubble? I think this text has something to say to us today. I mentioned last week that in chapter 4, Mark tells 4 parables, groups them together, that Jesus told about the kingdom. And then at the end of the 4th chapter, Mark, and then all of chapter 5, Mark has grouped together 4 miracle stories of Jesus. And each of them reveals the power of Jesus' authority, and it continues to push the reader to come to a conclusion about who exactly is this person of Jesus. What is this saying about his identity? Now, the first miracle in chapter 4, at the end of chapter 4, verses 35 to 41, shows the authority of Jesus to command natural forces. He commands the winds and the waves to die down in the Sea of Galilee when the disciples were on a boat during rough seas. The second story in chapter 5, verses 1 to 20, tells of Jesus encountering a man possessed by an evil spirit, several evil spirits. And he commands the demons to leave, and he shows his power over spiritual forces. The third story is sandwiched between the 4th story. So in the middle of the 4th story, in chapter 5, verses 25 to 34, there's a woman who's healed from a condition where she's been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years. And Jesus shows his authority and power over sickness. And then the last story, it starts at the beginning of chapter 5, verse 21 to 25. Then it's the story of the woman. Then he picks up the story again at 35 to 43. And it's the story of a synagogue ruler who comes to Jesus for the healing for his daughter. And his daughter dies as Jesus is on the way. Jesus proceeds to go to the house, heals the girl, brings her back from the dead, demonstrating his authority over the power of death. Jesus has authority over nature and disease and demons and death. The conclusion is Jesus is very powerful. And I wonder if we often think of Jesus in this way. I wonder if we don't most often think of him in rather mundane, tame ways. He's my homeboy. He's safe. And perhaps because of this, we have domesticated Jesus somehow in our minds. We've reduced him to something less than who he is because, after all, he's loving, and we all know that love is kind of soft. Had Jesus not been loving, if he was malicious and evil, can you imagine the fear that one with such power would bring to your heart? But he is loving, and so somehow we imagine his power is less than it is. What I want to do this morning is focus just on one of the stories where Jesus heals the demon-possessed man in verses 1 to 20 of chapter 5. And what I'd like to do is read through the story, and I'm going to make some comments as we go along. So let's start by reading. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. In this account, we're dealing with extreme, radical evil. I want to first point out the characteristics of someone who is demonized and where radical evil is in control. First, we're told that it's an impure spirit. In fact, to the Jewish person, this whole story would reek of being unclean. Not only the unclean or impure spirit that possessed a man, but also the fact that he was living among the tombs meant that he was in a perpetual state of impurity. You didn't touch dead bodies, you didn't dwell with dead bodies, and you certainly didn't live among tombs if you wanted to keep clean. Furthermore, the mention of pigs would have been extremely repulsive. Jews don't like pigs, you understand. And extreme evil is unclean and repulsive. Here's what you need to know: it wants you to leave it alone. Extreme evil doesn't want you meddling or touching it. It doesn't want you to try and influence it, and so it tries to repulse you. Impurity is a characteristic of the demonic. Something impure is in contrast to the character of God. God is a God of life, and this man was living among the dead. God is holy, and the spirits were evil. Demonic manifested itself in ways that were contrary to God. God celebrates beauty, and the demonic celebrates the twisted and the macabre. Filth, squalor, perversion, obscenity, abuse. These are how the demonic manifests its anti-God characteristics to try and keep you away. The second characteristic is that he is in isolation. He was cut off physically and emotionally from other people. Here was a man who was isolated from love. He was without meaningful connections with others. His only companions were corpses. Not only did the community not want him, he did not want to be with the community. And it seems he could not even stand being with himself. He was self-destructive, mutilating himself by cutting his flesh with stones, and also crying out in wails of misery by night. He was without peace. He was without joy. He was in torment, and he was being driven insane. Now, I know the discussion of demonic possession raises intellectual challenges, but I would suggest that there are intellectual challenges when evil is denied. The National Public Radio journalist Scott Simon has always avoided using the word evil when covering troubling events around the globe. He claims he was of a generation educated to believe that evil was a cartoonish moral concept. But then he watched with his daughters some of the sickening images from the chemical weapons attack in Syria in April of 2017 that killed scores of people, many of them children. Simon writes this: "We watched in silence. I've covered a lot of wars, but could think of nothing to say to make any sense. Finally, one of our daughters asked, 'Why would anyone do that?' I still avoid saying evil as a reporter, but as a parent, I've grown to feel it may be important to tell children about evil, as we struggle to explain cruel and incomprehensible behavior that may many see not just in history, but in our own times. I've interviewed Romeo Dallaire, who commanded UN peacekeeping forces in Rwanda from 1993 to 94, where more than 800,000 Tutsi Rwandans were slaughtered in only 3 months. Dallaire said that what happened made him believe in evil, and even a force he called the devil. I've negotiated with him, he told us, shaking his hand. Yes, there is no doubt in my mind. And the expression of evil to me is through the devil, and the devil at work and possessing human beings and turning them into machines of destruction. And one of the evenings in my office, I was looking out the window, and my senses felt that something was there with me that shifted me. I think that evil and good are playing themselves out, and God is monitoring and looking at how we respond to it. Friends, look at North America. Perversity, isolation, self-destruction, producing a joyless, loveless, peaceless society. Radical evil, demonic forces are real. Well, the story continues. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. The name Legion is actually a Roman military term which referred to a unit of soldiers numbering up to about 6,000. And the term legion would also have the effect of making the scene to be like that of a battle between powers. The power of evil and Jesus representing the kingdom of God. And I want you to see that when radical evil is confronted by radical good, it is evil that must bow. We sometimes forget that. We have this impression that evil and good are equal powers in a struggle to win the world. But that's not the case. That's not biblical. Evil is not equal to good. But you would not get this sense from the movies. You see, goodness always comes across as weak and frail and cowering before evil. And this is why God commands his church not to be overcome by evil, but to overcome evil with good, because good is more powerful than evil. See, Hollywood does not view good as powerful. How often have you watched a movie in which the plot runs something like this? Part 1, a man is wronged by some evil or bad person. You know the movie I'm talking about. This guy was bad, and he got wronged by this bad person. Second, part 2, the wrong person, the person who had been wronged, seeks justice, but finds that the systems of justice is weak. They're not able to overcome the evil. Even though the evil person may have been imprisoned, they were able to get out because they could bribe their way out of the prison and help to escape to some evil regime. Now, in the 60s, it would have been Cuba. In the 70s, it would have been Russia. Today, it's probably some ISIS-controlled territory, but we know those evil regimes that these bad men escaped to. Part 3, now this is where the movie really has the sizzle. This is what people come to see. The wrong person gets revenge by some extreme force and mass destruction to annihilate anybody in his way. They blow up the place where the evil person is hiding, and the evil person ends up dying in some kind of gruesome, horrendous, painful, and torturous death, and has the whole audience feeling relieved because they know that he deserved it. Have you seen that movie? But the equation for overcoming evil that Hollywood is trying to sell us doesn't add up. The equation is this: evil plus greater evil will equal goodness and justice. But actually, the reality is that evil plus greater evil actually equals extreme evil. Revenge only creates an ever-increasing evil society. Evil must be overcome by good. Well, the story continues. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake, where they drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this to the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. Do you not find it interesting that the people from the town were more concerned for the lives of the pigs than they were for the life of the one man who had been possessed? They were concerned for the pigs because it represented their wealth. And whenever you see a culture in conflict over the welfare of an individual versus the wealth of the many always wins over the welfare of the individual. In short, economic concerns outweigh the concerns for the welfare of people. In relation to this story, that type of position is one that aligns itself with radical evil. Before we go on, I just want to note that the difference that the radical good had upon this man, what difference radical good has upon a people. The man had been restless and tormented, and now we're told he's sitting and resting at peace. Before he was naked, humiliated, shamed. Now he's dressed and his dignity has been restored. Before he was out of control, and now he's in his right mind. Such is the effect of radical goodness upon a society. The story continues. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Some may wonder why Jesus did not allow the demon-possessed man to go with him. It was not because he thought the demon-possessed man was not worthy to be his disciple. On the contrary, he gives the man another assignment. Go home and tell your own people, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. He entrusted this man with the very first mission, as the very first missionary to Gentiles. This man was the first person honored with extending the ministry of Jesus beyond the borders of Israel. Isn't that incredible? A demon-possessed man was the first missionary to the Gentile world. Notice also that the townspeople wanted Jesus to leave. This is interesting, isn't it? You see, they were afraid of the extreme evil, so they forced the demon-possessed man away from them, but they were equally afraid of the extreme good, so that they begged Jesus to leave them. Mediocrity is the cry of those who prefer comfort over righteousness. So what does this story have to say to us? If extreme good overcomes extreme evil, then what must we conclude about our society that seemingly continues to grow more evil by the day? I think the obvious answer is that extreme goodness is not being adequately represented. If the church is meant to be those who are possessed by the spirit of extreme good, if that's us, and we have been given all authority to exercise that good, to overcome the powers of evil, then when we fail our society in this way, we consign it to its own self-destruction. And perhaps the reason that God has allowed extreme evil to become, I would argue, more apparent in our world is so that those who are representatives of extreme good might find themselves so repulsed by the evil in society that it will shake them out of their slumber and mediocrity. That we'll no longer be content with being merely nice and polite, but we will embrace the extreme goodness of God who we serve, seeking his power to overcome the evil in our world. And why is God so strong in his expectation of the church? Perhaps it's because he knows that we have been given the power to be catalysts of transforming society. Why is there so much evil in the world? It's not because God is not good. nor all powerful. It's because his church has failed to be good and to exercise the authority of God to overcome evil in society. In 1978, a small group of people from Burlington Baptist Church felt that there needed to be a new church in North Burlington to reach the anticipated homes that they believed would one day be built in this area. One of the people who was part of that committee was a fellow named Bob Berry. He used to work for what is now called CBM, Canadian Baptist Ministries. And in the midst of these discussions of planning, Bob's son, who was in university at McMaster, died. Because of his son's death, Bob was told by CBM he couldn't travel for 6 months. So suddenly he had all his weekends free. So after a couple months, he urged the committee to start this new church, and so 6 families from Burlington Baptist started to meet at Pearson High School, and Bob Berry was the very first pastor, preaching every Sunday for 4 months because he had his weekends free because his son had died. Friends, is it possible that his son's death could have crushed the idea of that plant? That he may have despaired and just sunk into a hole and said, I can't even think about a church plant, my son's died. But instead, it enabled the church to start in a way that it never could have otherwise, because we had a man who was available. Radical evil wants to stop us by any means available. But we have been given the Spirit of God, and he has told us that he is working all things together for good, his good, ruling in our world, overcoming evil, creating beauty, restoring order, bringing peace, setting people free. Good is not always easy. It is not always pleasant. And there is always a temptation to strike back against the evil we experience with greater evil. But radical good is rugged and gritty and ruthless. It will overpower evil because it is greater than evil. And even when those possessing the authority of radical good seem to have forgotten, it still has power. And it's time for those who are possessed by the spirit of radical good to rise up and overcome evil with good. Any questions on today's sermon?
Alone, my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are stilled, when striving cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand.
doubts in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from his hand till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I'll stand. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from his hand till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I'll stand.
Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back and change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray. Come set your rule and reign in our hearts again. Increase in us, we pray. Unveil why we made. Come set our hearts ablaze with hope, like wildfire in our very souls. Holy Spirit, come invade us now. We are your church. We need your power. Yes, we do. In us. We seek your kingdom first. We hunger and we thirst. We refuse to waste our lives for your joy and pride. To see the captives' hearts released, hurt the sick, the poor at peace. We lay down our lives for heaven's cause. We are your church. We pray revive. Will you stand with me? Build your kingdom here. And build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the
Amen.